Hello, Matt 2. So this video is all about reviewing completing the square, a concept we did first semester. Okay, and we're going to start basic and work our way up. So first we talk about squaring a binomial. When I square a binomial, I write it out as, right, whatever the binomial, right, times itself, okay, and then I have to distribute, right? We talked about we distribute the x to both terms. X times x gives me x squared. X times 3 is 3x. But then I have to also distribute this 3 to get plus 3x plus 9, which would give me x squared, combine like terms in the middle, plus 6x plus 9. So this is what we get when we square the binomial. Okay? So when we take a look at the next one, it's no different. The only thing is, right, we have x minus 6 times x minus 6. When I do x times x, I get x squared. But now when I do x times negative 6, it's minus 6x. Negative 6 times x is minus 6x. Negative 6 times negative 6 is plus 36. Now that I have that, when I combine like terms in the middle, I get x squared minus 12x plus 36. Okay, so looking at that, so now the next thing in order to review is factoring. Remember, when we factored a quadratic trinomial in the form x squared plus bx plus c, right? What we did is we looked for the numbers that multiply to give us c and add to give you b, right? And then we would write it as a binomial times a binomial. So x plus, basically e times x plus some number f. So E and F are the numbers you get that multiply to give you C and add up to B. So in this first one, what multiplies to give me 25 and adds up to give you negative 10? Well, negative 5 times negative 5 is 25 and adds up to negative 10. So we say x minus 5 times x minus 5, right? Which could also be written as x minus 5 all squared. And I could do that because I have the same binomials. Okay, pause the video, try and factor number 2 and 3, and then come back and check your answers. So the next one, what multiplies to give me negative 30 and adds up to give me negative 7? Well, that would be 10 times 3 would give me 30, right? Since I need it to be negative 7, if I change that to negative 10 plus 3 would be negative 7. So this would be x minus 10 times x plus 3. And the last one, what multiplies to give me 16 and adds up to give me 8? That would be 4 and 4. So it would be x plus 4 times x plus 4, which simplifies to x plus 4 all squared. Now, this is all a review. Now when we look at a perfect square trinomial, right, it's a quadratic that can be written as a binomial squared. Okay, for instance, when I look at something like x squared minus 10x minus 10x plus 25, we said that's equivalent to x minus 5 all squared, which means this is a perfect square trinomial. Okay, so here's the thing though, right? When we look at it, what is the value of the constant that makes this a perfect square? So what would C have to be in order for this quadratic to be a perfect square? Well, how do we find that? When we look up above, right, up here, x squared minus 10x plus 25 is a perfect square trinomial, and x squared plus 8x plus 16 is a perfect square trinomial. What could I do to get 25, and what could I do to get 16? Well, if I take the middle term and I divide it by 2 and square it, that would give me the constant, meaning negative 10 divided by 2 all squared gives me negative 5 squared, which is 25. That is my constant. Over here, 8 divided by 2 all squared is 4 squared, which is 16. There you go. Okay, so the rule of thumb is, right, to find the value of c that makes it a perfect square trinomial, I'm going to take half of 14 and square it. So 7 squared is 49. So in order for this to be a perfect square trinomial, x squared plus 14x plus 49. Okay, that is key, all right, as we move along here. So the first thing we're going to review is solving, right, these problems by completing the square. Okay, there's two things you need to know. One, how we complete the square, and that's the example we just did up above. But two, the other thing you need to know is if I give you an equation such as 3 equals 3, if I do something to one side, such as say add 1 here, what you have to understand is that this is no longer a true statement. So to keep it a true statement, I'm going to add 1 to the other side. So remember, whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So in the first example here, the first thing I want to do is move the constant to the other side, right? For example, if I want to get rid of 1, how do I get rid of it? I subtract 1, and I end up with x squared minus 10x equals negative 1. Next, I'm basically going to complete the square on the x squared plus bx part. So this here, I'm going to complete the square on. All right. So how do I do that? Well, first, I'm going to take negative 10 divided by 2, square it to get 25. So this becomes x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals negative 1. But here's the thing. Since I added 25 to this side, I have to go to the other side and add 25, right? So that's what we use to complete this square. So now I'm going to basically write the quadratic as a binomial squared. For instance, 1 multiplies to give me 25 adds up to negative 10. X minus 5 all squared equals 24. Now I just solve the equation. Solve using square root method. Oh. So first thing I do here, take the square root of both sides. But remember, anytime I solve using the square root method, I have to keep in mind the plus and the negative square root of 24. And from here, I get two values, okay? When I solve it, I'm going to go add 5. So I get x equals 5 plus or minus the square root of 24. And from here, this gives me two answers. The first one would be 5 plus the square root of 24. The other would be 5 minus the square root of 24. And if I go to my calculator and calculate this, I get So for the first one, I get 5 plus root 24, which is 9.9, and then 5 minus root 24, 0.101. Okay, so let's look at a couple others. So the next example, right, I already have the constant on the right side. So right here, I'm going to complete the square. Okay, so x squared plus 18x. I'm going to have to add something here, and then I'm going to have to add the same amount here. How do I find this number? I take 18 divided by 2, square it, and it gives me 9. Okay, and 9 squared is 81. So if I add 81 to this side, I add 81 to this side. So now on this, when I write it as a binomial squared, x plus 9 all squared equals negative 92 plus 81 is negative 11. Now here's the thing with this one. When I go to take the square root of both, okay, for the next problem, what I want you guys to do is, before we start, is to change this to minus 150. Okay, so with this problem, the first step I'm going to do is add the 150 to this side. I'm going to add 150 to this side. Okay, and I get 3x squared minus 36x equals 150. But now, since there's a number in front here, I'm going to factor the greatest common factor out of these two terms. So that happens to be 3. So I'm going to divide each term by 3, right? The 3's cancel out here, leave me with x squared minus 36 divided by 3 is 12x, right? And that equals 150. Now there's a couple of ways I could do this. When I do this, I think the easiest thing to do next is get rid of the 3 by dividing by it. And that leaves me with x squared minus 12x equals 150 divided by 3 is 50. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to complete the square on the next part. Okay, so x squared minus 12x. If I take half of negative 12 and square it, I'm going to add 36, because that gives you negative 6 squared, which is positive 36, equals 50 plus 36. Remember, whatever I add here, I have to add here. So now, right away, when I go to do that, now I can go ahead and write this as x minus 6 all squared equals 86. I'm going to go ahead, take the square root of both sides. X minus 6 equals plus or minus the square root of 86. Add 6, x equals 6 plus or minus the square root of 86. Right? Now, I can put this in the calculator and get my two values. X equals 6 plus the square root of 86. Then I can do 6 minus the square root of 86. So your first answer would be 15.3 and your second answer would be 3.3. Okay, so I want you to try the next two problems on your own and come back and check your answers. Real quick, I want you to change this one to 8x and this one to 16x. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is subtract 15 from both sides. I get x squared plus 8x equals negative 15. Now I'm going to complete the square. So I get x squared plus 8x plus, I'm going to take half of 8 and square it. That'll give me 16. So I'm going to add 16 here, and I'm going to add 16 here, right? When I go ahead and write this as a binomial squared, x plus 4 all squared equals, that's going to be negative 15 plus 16 is 1. Now I take the square root of this side, square root of this side, and I get x plus 4 equals plus or minus the square root of 1. And remember, right, this branches off into two answers. X plus 4 equals positive 1. And the reason is the square root of 1 is 1. Then x plus 4 equals negative 1. And if I solve each of these equations, x equals negative 3 is one solution. Then subtract 4, and I get x equals negative 5 is another solution. Okay? Now the next one. First thing I do is I subtract 14, x squared plus 16x. Right away, I'm going to complete the square here. Half of 16 squared is going to give me 8 squared, which is plus 64, equals negative 14 plus 64 would give me 50. So right away here, that's going to factor out to be x plus 8 equals, x plus 8 all squared equals negative 14 plus 64 is 50. Take the square root, x plus 8 equals, right, plus or minus the square root of 50. And now we branch off into our two answers. X plus 8 equals the square root of 50. X plus 8 equals negative square root of 50. Subtract 8. Root 50 minus 8 is going to give you, that's going to give you x equals negative 0.93. And over here, when you subtract 8, you get negative square root of 50 minus 8. Which would give you negative 15.1. And these would be your two solutions. The key here is being able to complete the square, right? That will be a very important concept for the whole unit. Go ahead, try your homework, and we'll go over it tomorrow.